Good evening, Community Board chairs and members of the New York City Council Queens delegation. Pursuant to Section 241 of the New York City Charter, the Borough Board must submit its expense and capital budget priorities for fiscal year 2022 to the mayor, City Council, and the Director of Management and Budget by February 25th. I would like to acknowledge our board chairs who are here today. I'll start with CB1, Marie Torniali. CB2, Lisa Andela. CB3, Renetta English. CB4, Marialina Giampino. CB5, Vincent Arcuri. CB8, Alexa Wiseman. CB7, Eugene Kelty. CB8, Martha Taylor. CB9, Kenichi Wilson. CB10, Betty Brayton. CB11, Michael Budubin McCown. CB12, Princess Doris McGee. CB13, Brian Block. CB14, Dolores Orr. And I also want to acknowledge we're joined by council members Koslowitz and Holden. Now, the document that you have received before the meeting is a compilation of the information received from the community board's priority list, Queens Borough budget hearing that was held virtually on February 1st, 2021, as well as other data. I would like to take this time to thank the community board chairs and members of the New York City Council Queens delegation who joined me throughout the day and evening on the budget hearing panel. Before voting, Amanda and Richard Lee from my office will provide a presentation that will briefly touch upon the highlights of the document. If, after discussion, there are any recommended changes from the community boards or the Queens delegation, they can be included as additional or modified items. With that, let's begin our presentation.
Hi everyone, my name is Amanda. If I haven't met everyone, which I think I have, I'm here with Richard Lee and we'll be doing the presentation together. Let me just share my screen. One second. Can everybody see that? Good? Okay, we're good to go. So first things first, if possible, unfortunately, we're not doing this in person, but if possible, if you do have a question, you can just select the raise hand function. If possible, can we please wait until the end of the presentation for questions, and then Richard and I will answer and address any questions or concerns that you will have. Okay. So first, this is just a quick budget overview. This is not in your book. So basically the FY 2022 prelim budget anticipates a spending plan of $92.28 billion. This is a 4.09 billion increase compared to fiscal year 2021's adopted budget, which you could see is 88.18 billion. This budget is expected to collect 62.19 billion in tax revenue. Some of this tax revenue includes property tax, personal income tax, and sales tax, which is all listed here. And unfortunately, New York City is expected or currently facing a potential $5.2 billion budget gap due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide. So now if everybody opens to page 3 in the PDF file that we sent, in case you wanted to follow along, and we'll announce the pages as we go. Firstly, the Office of the Queens Borough President is expected to receive $5.82 million for FY22. This is a decrease of $129,000 compared to FY 2021. So obviously, our recommendation is to increase the agency budget to better serve the borough of Queens. Next, we have community boards. Community boards, unfortunately, citywide are also anticipated to receive a cut. So the community board budget for fiscal year 2022 is $18.79 million, a $219,000 shortfall from the adopted budget of fiscal year 2021. We took it one step further, and what we did was we compared all of the community boards in Queens versus the other community boards of other boroughs to receive what they're expected to receive in FY 2022. So Queens Community Boards, they serve the highest amount of residents per borough, per community board rather, I'm sorry. But they receive the second lowest per capita support among the 5 boroughs. As you can see there, Queens is only getting $1.92 per capita support. It's the second lowest compared to Staten Island, that's getting $1.60 per capita. And the highest, I believe, is Manhattan at $2.72 per capita. Did I hold that there for long enough? Yes? Okay. I can only see a couple of faces on my screen. It's so small. Okay. So our recommendation, of course, for community boards is restore the funding for the community boards of Queens, and then also fund everyone's top priorities of each community board. So in the book that you got, at the very end of that book includes testimonies when the community boards and other organizations testified from February 1st, and then also include each community board's top 10 capital requests and top 10 expense requests. Richard?
Yep. So Department of Education, in fiscal year 22, we are anticipating $921 million more dollars going into Department of Education. Largely, it is coming in personnel service with the added cost that COVID has caused. Next slide. Like we do every year, we are looking at Department of Education in an equity perspective. We always calculate this using per pupil spending. And we did the breakdown like we usually do in 3 different scenarios. The first one, Amanda, could you go back real quick? Sorry. Is our per pupil spending across all schools in the borough. And when we're looking at all schools in the borough, compared to the citywide average of $25,746 per student, Queens is right now receiving $23,925, so nearly $2,000 less per student than the citywide average. Next slide. We looked at the funding per pupil across all the different school levels. And this year, unlike previous years where we had, I think it was 5 to 9, where we weren't the lowest per pupil spending. In this year's fiscal budget, looking at the anticipated spending for the city on school budgets, Queens is currently receiving the lowest per pupil spending across the board for every single school level. This is particularly alarming for our high schools, which are significantly less than other high schools that we have in the city. The largest source of funding per school right now is fair student funding. And so we analyze the fair student funding amounts for each. Queens right now, as you can see in your book, I'm sorry, the DOE section in the book started on page 7. If you look in the book, we did include information where we looked at the fair student funding and what the gap was on fair student funding across the board. And Queens is currently the only borough that has nearly reached $200 million in the gap on fair student funding. Most of our schools only receive 90% of fair student funding. And when we looked at the fair student funding numbers, we are the lowest. And so we are making the recommendations, sorry, Amanda. We are making the recommendations that we increase expansion for the schools as well as construction. You know, every year we look at capacity rates. The data for capacities were unavailable this year, understandably because so many students were on remote. And we're hoping to include this next year, but we anecdotally already know that our schools are overcrowded, but we didn't have this year's data to support it. But there are no school seats, so it'll be more or less the same next year, where we're going to have overcrowded seats. So we are making the recommendation that we increase capital and expense funds for the schools, as well as increase childcare and Head Start sites. So childcare now falls under the DOE's overview. The programs of 3K and UPK also do, but what happened with childcare is that a lot of the funding that would have funded childcare have been instead used towards the UPK, expanding UPK and 3K. So we are asking that the city increase childcare slots for the 2 and up programs, as well as to continue the city council initiatives.
Thank you. Next, we have Department for Aging, and that's on page 10 of your PDFs. So the mayor's FY22 preliminary budget forecasts a $383.55 million budget for the Department of Aging. You can see here it's about a $28.85 million shortfall from the FY21's adopted budget. Although you can see senior centers and meals were increased 1.9 million, there are cuts to case management and social adult daycare, which I'll show you on the next slide. It's not on this slide. But the main decrease here is mostly attributed to the huge cut in overall senior services, which is right here. I don't know if you could see me moving my mouse. It's right here, which is 29.77 million. This was the other slide that I was talking about. So you could see here, everything pretty much stayed the same except for social adult daycare, which was decreased by 1.5 million. We also, basically what we did was we analyzed all of the current FY21 DIFTA contracts and compared that to each borough's 65 and over population. So Queens receives 28.2% of the total funding, making it only $213.14 per capita, which is slightly less than the city average here, $217.44. Also in your book, we didn't include it in the PowerPoint, in your book is a list of all of the senior program contract providers. So that's where those numbers came from, by the way. So our recommendations for Department of Aging is 1, increase funding for senior services. 2, restore senior services, which was from the Borough President's discretionary funding, which I believe the BP will touch upon in a second. Also, we would like to expand home delivered meals to organizations that provide, culturally sensitive meals to seniors, especially now during the pandemic. We don't think that anybody, but seniors especially who are very vulnerable, need to go out unnecessarily for basic needs. And then also to continue city council initiatives. So BP, did you want to touch upon the discretionary funding?
Yeah, and let me just acknowledge we've been joined by council members Adams and Vallone. Yeah, in past years, the 5 borough presidents received discretionary funding through the city council for senior centers. We've seen, due to the pandemic and the financial situation, hard decisions obviously had to be made. And during the last budget, this funding was actually eliminated. So arguably, one of the populations that have been affected the most by the pandemic are seniors, and I hope to see my office's senior money restored. So we look forward to continuing to work with the council, but this is very important during this time. We need to be doing more, not less.
Thank you. Next, we have Department of Youth and Community Development. That's on page 19, if we're still following along. Okay, so the mayor's FY 2022 prelim budget forecasts a $745.37 million budget for DYCD. This is a $47.44 million shortfall. Several programs here are funded less, as you can see, including adult literacy, Beacon community centers, and community development programs. Fortunately, there are some increases. Programmatic funds for out-of-school youth time, which includes Compass and Sonic programs, they're budgeted at $3 million more than the FY21 adopted budget. And then also SYEP is funded at $57.46 million more, which I think the BP also wanted to touch upon. About SYEP.
Yeah, we need, on SYEP, we need opportunities for our youth. So it gives me hope to see plans of SYEP not only restored, but increased from fiscal year 2021. And these funds, as it stands, would support 70,000 slots. So something very important as we talk about ensuring our young people have jobs, and especially coming out of this pandemic, it's going to be critical for them to have, jobs in Queens. So definitely look forward to seeing that, and quite frankly, something to do, because they've been stuck inside. And so assuming we all get the vaccine sometime this year, I'm hoping that we'll start to see more of this programming ramped up. So thank you. And talk about the economy too. That money goes right back into the pockets of small businesses in Queens, So it's a win-win. So thank you.
Thank you. We're still on DYCD. So next, we broke down the current FY21 DYCD contracts, basically the same way we broke down, like a couple slides back, the DIFTA contracts to compare what each borough is receiving. So out of the 2,257 sites funded, only 467 of them are located in Queens. Then when we add up all the numbers of the awards, Queens receives a little bit more than 128 million, which is 21% of that total funding. So just like an interesting way to break up current DYCD contracts. Did I hold this there for long enough? Good. Okay, perfect. I know I talk fast, so. Okay, so we have a few recommendations for DYCD. To fund the universal after school for elementary school care program, increase funding to cover more campus sites in Queens, increase funding for adult literacy. Obviously, we're thrilled about the SYEP numbers going up, but we would love to see even more increased funding for SYEP. Like the borough president said, it only benefits Queens and multiple facets of Queens. Also increased funding for additional staff tasked with executing discretionary contracts. For those of you that don't know, I was at the city council for about 6 years before this, and I can tell you that so many contracts go through DYCD for all the council members and a lot of the citywide initiatives. And because there's so many contracts going through and there's not enough staff, some DYCD contracts take way longer than it should. And that's taking time and money away essentially from the nonprofits that are fronting the cost and actually doing the work. So we'd love to see an increased funding for that. And then also, of course, to continue city council initiatives. Next, we have New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and that's on page 22, if we're still following along. Okay, so the mayor's FY 2022 preliminary budget forecasts a $1.77 billion budget for the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. This is almost a $48 million increase from the FY 21 adopted budget, so that's a very good thing. Disease prevention and treatment, disease prevention and treatment, environmental disease prevention, epidemiology, family health and mental hygiene. Yeah, those were all the ones that were increased. Something we definitely wanted to touch upon though was the status of Queens hospitals. So I don't know if you remember, but this list was in your book last year, but it wasn't presented on via PowerPoint. So these numbers haven't changed since last year. So we just basically wanted to provide information on hospitals and show you basically like what the status was of them going into the pandemic. So from this list, the 9 Queens hospitals are H&H Elmhurst, H&H Queens, Jamaica Hospital, LIJ, Mount Sinai, Flushing Hospital, Forest Hills Hospital, New York Presbyterian, and St. John's Episcopal. So out of all of those hospitals together, 3,872 beds amongst all of them were in Queens. So this made Queens the most underbedded borough per resident in New York City. Our office has been in contact with Queens hospitals who have told us that they were able to, add capacity by converting unused spaces now and, during the pandemic. We're still in the pandemic actually, but that data hasn't been reflected yet. Also, just so you know, there is a lump sum payment to New York City Health and Hospitals in the mayor's FY 2022 prelim budget, and that's $1.28 billion. And that's an increase of $112 million from last year's adopted budget. However, that Medicaid reimbursement to the state hasn't been fully actualized yet in the prelim budget. So those numbers aren't reflected really here. We'll get more information about that when it comes to the executive budget.
Let me, are you gonna go?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Oh, yeah. No, go ahead. Go ahead through the recommendations.
Also in your books, but not on the PowerPoint slide. I can actually keep it there for a while. So in your books, but not in the PowerPoint slide, what we did was we included 3 months worth of daily COVID-19 cases by borough. So those are all like the charts that you're seeing if you're following through the book. as well as vaccine data. That vaccine data was updated last Saturday at 11 a.m. That's also broken down by borough. However, and we're hoping to get more information on this. That's not fully, like, I would say, it's not fully comprehensible if those numbers are residents that received the vaccine of Queens or people that came in and actually got their vaccine in that borough. So that's one piece of data that we're hoping to find out, because, as you know, there's a lot of difficulties surrounding vaccination sites, and sometimes or oftentimes people will go all the way to Staten Island just to get their vaccine. So that's data that may not be 100% reflected yet, but that's something that we're definitely working on getting. And then I think the BP wanted to touch upon the status of hospitals.
Yeah, and we've been getting around to all of the hospitals. I'm nearly done my tour of all of them.
Mhm.
Actually, interestingly enough, I had a virtual tour Friday of one, which was the first of its kind, I want to say. But I want to start off by thanking our healthcare heroes who've done so much, and I've met so many good people along the way who obviously went through the trauma, at the course of the height of the pandemic. But one of the things, we believe we're in a very strong position, I want to say, in Queens to really fight for more resources for our hospitals. I mean, we were the epicenter of the epicenter. I don't have to tell many of you. And we've been talking to H&H and talking to the mayor's folks about, potential expansions in Queens. Think about all of the empty storefronts and many development projects that are happening that are not going to really be able to fill their ground floor space. We feel this is an optimal time to really leverage, the lack of, or the challenges around filling storefronts to really expand healthcare. But more importantly, we need to see more money in the budget. As Amanda alluded to, Queens has the lowest amount of hospital beds per 1,000 people, and we were already underbedded a long time ago before the pandemic hit. So I look forward to continued conversation with the deputy mayor, but I think we're really we have to use this moment to push for more assistance for the hospitals, whether it's capital investments, and we've heard and certainly got lists from many of the hospitals already on that, but outside of that, expansion is something we've spoken to the congressional delegation, which we hosted last week as well with many of you. And I think this is an optimal time where we all need to be rowing in the same direction to make sure we're not back here again in the event of another pandemic. So thank you for that, Amanda.
Thank you. And just to echo what the BP already said, is that our recommendations are to increase expense and capital funding for Queens EJC hospitals. Also, to increase funding for operated Article 28 freestanding healthcare facilities, essentially just freeing up beds in hospitals for COVID-19 patients. Of course, increase COVID-19 resources. That's in your book, and that could range anywhere from more testing sites and also permanent vaccination sites. And then also to continue city council health initiatives. Richard?
So on the fire department, we are seeing a significant decrease of about $12 million. There's actually $19.5 million that are being decreased on the personnel services side, and a slight increase on the OTPS side. Every year, we actually provide response times of both fires and EMTs. We were unable to compile that information because in the past they did it in a 1-year perspective, but now they've been doing it on a weekly and a monthly perspective. So it's hard to kind of combine that data. But we know anecdotally still that the response times coming out of Queens in both responses for EMTs and responses for structural fires are higher than the other boroughs. And so we are making similar recommendations this year. Amanda, next slide. So we always mentioned the reopening of Engine 261 to help relieve the firefighters that are covering Western Queens because they cover a large area that even sometimes go into Astoria and Jackson Heights. We are still requesting a Rockaway ladder company, and still requesting that we expand the first response station in Roosevelt Island because the firefighters on the Queens side has to respond to incidents in Roosevelt Island. We're asking that the city expand the number of EMTs, and this is something that really came out of the pandemic, and to which the borough president was mentioning before, is that the pandemic really just shed a light. We always had a lot of inequities in terms of services, but what the pandemic was shed a light, and we had numerous EMTs who were working more than one shift, more than two shifts, multiple shifts. And I think it was pretty evident that we needed to increase the number of EMTs. So we're making that recommendation. And we're also making a recommendation to expand the number of the fifth man firefighters. So for those of you who don't know, fire team responses are usually with a 4-person engine company. And in the sense that a fifth person is on rotation for the larger scale fire responses. But here in Queens, where we have such large areas to cover, and so few in the number of engine companies with a fifth person, we do have the lowest response rates. And so we are asking that in order to shorten the time span, because it takes a longer time for firefighters to respond and travel to an incident, that we expand the number of fifth man firefighters in Queens. And the next slide. The police department, compared to the fiscal 21 adopted budget, saw an increase of $195 million in this preliminary budget. If you look on page 31, which is in the book, we usually provide the borough overview of the top seven incidents of crime. And you can see that there was a slight increase in response in incidents in both Queens North and Queens South. So I'll let everyone kind of review this in their books because it is a lot of information. But note that we are making the recommendations that we expedite the creation of the Flushing Meadows Corona Park substation, which is the substation that our office, the borough president's office, funded 3 years ago, and the restoration of the 116 precinct. I think the borough president wanted to say a quick few words in this section.
Yeah, both make sense, and I know CB13 is on here, Brian Block, and many of the members of CB13 have been calling for this precinct going back before I was born. The mayor obviously had funded it last fiscal year and then pulled the money out of the budget last year and reallocated it to Roy Wilkins, which is good. I mean, we always say, you know, we want things for our young people to do. But we also know that we have the challenge of response times in the 105, which covers about 400 lane miles, which is equivalent from traveling from here to Boston. So we believe this funding should be restored. There's no contradiction in asking for safe and fair policing. And this is something that the mayor committed to and then, you know, pulled the money last minute. So we both, you know, we now have a community center and we're starting that process now and very happy about that. But we also need to make sure that the commitment that was made is kept. So we look forward to working through that with many of you in the Queens delegation who've been a part of this process for a long time. So thank you, Richard, on that.
Thanks, VP. Next, we have the Department of Sanitation. This is in page 35 of your PDF. So the mayor's FY 2022 prelim budget plans for a $1.74 billion budget for the Department of Sanitation. This is a $32.1 million shortfall from FY 21's adopted budget. So what we've done is on the next slide is we included the number of Queens uniform personnel by district, which didn't appear to change at all from the current fiscal year, FY 21. So I'll give you a second. And these charts are all in your books as well. And then next, we have the assigned enforcement agents by borough, where Queens appears to have lost 4 agents. So our recommendations for the Department of Sanitation is one, increase cleanup of major commercial corridors, especially for where there are bids in Queens, and then also increase garbage and recycling pickup throughout the borough. Richard?
Just quickly on the sanitation, one thing I just wanted to mention, the decrease seems to be largely coming from a reduction on the COVID response team that Department of Sanitation took up, and we'll look into it more closely if people would like to know the information. On the housing side, which is on page 39 of your book, we can see a $22.56 million reduction. A lot of this is because the federal funds hasn't been realized yet. And once the federal funds are realized, we'll probably see a restoration on some of these programs. Next slide. The one thing that we always bring up is that Queens has not gotten its fair share of affordable housing built and preserved in the last 7 years. Right now, Queens totals about 17,000 affordable housing units that was created under this administration, and it's only 9.5% of the total that was created. If you look at the other boroughs, you can see they're significantly higher. Next slide. We included a map of the borough overview of where our sites are, and you can clearly see in Queens, there's a lot of white.
Except in Far Rockaway. Except in Far Rockaway.
Except in Far Rockaway, you're right. Except in Far Rockaway. But large parts of the borough where we do need affordable housing hasn't been created. Community Board 3 and Community Boards 4 currently have the highest severe overcrowding rate in the entire city right now. And we do need more affordable housing. So we are making the recommendation, like we do every single year, to create more affordable housing in Queens and explore and expand the use of community land trusts in Queens as an opportunity to create more affordable housing. We ask that they continue housing support in areas impacted by Hurricane Sandy, because foreclosure and Hurricane Sandy are actually still impacting a lot of residents. And to continue a lot of the city council initiatives that we have, that the city council has supported in the past.
Richard, let me chime in here too. And we know obviously we have an eviction moratorium in place right now, but one of the things I'm really worried about is once that moratorium is lifted, you're going to have a lot of people going into the system. So we really need to push for foreclosure assistance, more money for one-shot deals so people can pay their behind rent, Section 8 vouchers. I mean, all of this is going to be critical in preserving and keeping people in their homes. And I can't tell you how many people and landlords too, who just have that challenge, small landlords who are just having big challenges right now because their tenants can't pay the rent right now as well. And we know that in most cases, in a lot of cases for communities in Queens, the tenant renting is really helping to subsidize the mortgage. So people are really behind. I really urge us to really pay close attention to this. Otherwise, we're going to keep having that same conversation we have every year. Why do they keep putting homeless shelters, everywhere? If we're not building new affordable, and if we're not preserving and keeping people in their homes, we're going to have, I'm telling you, this is going to be a big challenge as we move forward. So I'm hoping we could do a lot there and make sure that there's I know we were part of it, and I know working with Councilmember Adams, I think she's taking it now, and Miller, we worked a lot on the foreclosure initiatives in the council. We really need to ensure that that funding is getting beefed up for initiatives like this. Otherwise, we're going to have foreclosures and blight and, obviously less tax subsidy to play with as well. So let's keep people in their homes. Thank you, Richard, for that.
Thank you. Next, we have Department of Cultural Affairs. So the mayor's FY 2022 preliminary budget is forecasting a $144.18 million budget for cultural affairs. This is a $45.24 million shortfall from the FY 2021's adopted budget. This is citywide, by the way. Then we list the 8 cultural institution groups in Queens. All but 2 are anticipating cuts from FY21's adopted budget. In total, the overall cuts are, and this number isn't in thousands like a lot of our other charts are, so the total here is $384,256. So when you take all of these SIGs in Queens and you compare them to the other boroughs, there are noticeable differences. Queens has the second highest amount of SIGs, but the per capita is lower than every borough. Queens cultural institution groups receive $3.24 per capita, compared to, like, let's say Brooklyn, $6.93, or even the Bronx at $15.35. Let me just hold it there for 1 second. I don't think I stayed there long enough. Our recommendations for cultural affairs are increased funding for all the cultural organizations in Queens, and then also continue the city council initiatives.
So parks can be found on page 50 of your book. As you can see, compared to the FY21 adopted budget, the FY22 prelim right now is forecasting 29.6 billion more dollars in the budget. Like we do every year, we provided the staffing levels borough-wide for our parks. And for our recommendation this year, we are requesting that there be a slight increase in number of personnel in Queens. The street tree pruning is a request that we regularly get, not only in our budget hearing, but in our request that comes into our offices. So we're asking for additional funding for the street for tree pruning, capital funding for our parks, as well as capital improvements to Flushing Meadow Park to address flooding, which is a perennial issue that has still not been addressed, and to continue the city council initiatives. I know one initiative that was significantly reduced was the Parks Equity Initiative from the City Council, and we're hoping that we'll see a restoration of that program.
Any questions?
I think the baby has a question, Richard.
She actually grabbed my phone and logged into the Zoom somehow. So I'm on 2 accounts right now.
Are there any questions, comments? Okay, I see CB7. Let's go to Gene Kelty.
Thank you, Borough President. Nice job. Thank you very much on what your office has done. I do have a question on the Department of Sanitation. One of the things that happens when we have a cut in sanitation is usually there's a lot of dumping that goes on. One of the things that I'd like to see, because it was working good in Queens, was the collection of e-waste that they had to abandon, as well as our home, what they call household dumps that we used to have. College Point used to be one of my areas that we had household dumps where people could take stuff to get rid of it, other than finding spots on the street and just dumping it. And I would like to see if we could try to get them reacclimated again to at least opening the household dumps, so that we could at least bring the electrical equipment over there. Because right now everybody's storing it. A lot of the electrical stores are not taking it back. And if we could get that open, we will probably help the sanitation, that they won't have to go enforcement, since we lost 4 enforcement agents for that area. So I would just be looking to get our household dumps back open in Queens to help out people that want to get rid of the garbage.
You mean e-waste, like
e-waste, or we had furniture they want to, usually they pick it up, but since February, been beat over the head with the storms that our recycling is out the window right now. Everybody just keeps putting it out and pulling it back in. So, but the e-waste, yes, there's stockpiling and nobody's able to get rid of it. Tires we're not able to get rid of anymore. All that stuff that was bad stuff we used to take to the household dumps, or the e-waste was being picked up. Now that's all canceled again. So it might be something we should look at for sanitation to help them
I don't know
out.
if Richard or Amanda wants to chime in on that.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, we can certainly look at that. The It doesn't specify under which programs it falls under, so, but we will comb through the department's estimates to see if there was a reduction or if they can afford an increase for e-waste collection. So we'll do that tonight.
Okay, Richard, thank you. Just as I said, even if we can drop it off at the buildings, it gives the people an opportunity to get rid of the e-waste instead of stockpiling. Or I'm telling you, Mr. Borough President, it's going to be in a black garbage bag, crushed and thrown out at the curb, and it's going to get put into the system anyhow. Thank
You
you.
can also add that to our list of recommendations as well.
Thank you. All righty, we're gonna go to CB5, Vincent Okuri.
Yes. Thank you. So in discussing, excuse me, health and hospitals, every year we fail to recognize Wyckoff Heights Medical Center, which is on the Brooklyn side, but provides service. 30% of its population comes from the Queens side. So there's it was the first place, the first COVID death in the city was at Wyckoff. It was converted during the height to handle all COVID. Right now, they're maintaining one wing of one floor and staff in case of a influx in COVID patients, but we should include Wyckoff's information.
Okay. Thank you. I know Brent has been speaking with them too. So you made that point before. I think that's one of the places one of the few places I have left to tour as well. So
If you want to tour, let me know. I'll go with you.
thank you. Thank you. All right. Any other questions?
I had one other question, if I may.
Go ahead, Mr. Vincent.
Are we using any new census data? Because the last census was so skewed, and that's why Queens has been taking a beating. Have we been able to get anything new on the census? Richard?
So the new census numbers are actually going to be coming out next year. And so what we've been using until now is what's called the American Community Survey. And the American Community Survey is just an estimate. So it's not perfect. And the city is still using both the 2010 census and the American Community Survey as a basis. So we're hoping once the new census number comes out in 2022, that we'll have better numbers and we can more accurately advocate for more funds and programs into our areas.
Because I think what we're seeing is a decrease in population, increase in senior population, decrease in school age population. So we need to be careful with those numbers.
Thank you, Vincent. All right, I'm going to go to CB6, Alexa Weissman.
Thank you, Borough President. And thank you, Amanda and Richard. This is only my second time going through this process, and it's just like, I'm going to say what's obvious. It's just like so alarming to see these cuts and to see how underfunded so much of the essential services and organizations are in Queens. And of course, we're all talking about hospital beds, but also school seats and, you know, so much of it. So I just thank you for putting it together and for advocating for us, and to all the council members here. Thank you for just keep pushing for us getting what we deserve here in this extremely important borough that deserves a lot. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that too. I mean, and clearly these disparities impacted us during COVID, right? I mean, this is, you know, this is one of the reasons that we have to fight and make sure that this mayor understands that Queens should not play second fiddle to any place. I mean, we were the epicenter, and we were the epicenter for a reason. And many of it has to do with the disparities in funding and programming. So I can assure you collectively, because there's no one person who can do it, I think collectively we all have a strong case on why they should fix these issues. So thank you for that. We're going to now go to Dolores Orr, CB14.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Borough President. Two things on the community board cuts. Queens has the lowest budget, and then we're going to get cut. And I know that I believe most of the chairs and DMs are very concerned that it's a small dollar amount in the big pool of money, but it's going to result in most of us losing some of our office staff, either our part-time person or cutting someone full-time to part-time. So what is the chance of us getting our fair share in the community board budget so that doesn't happen?
So one, I think, and I was actually with Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney Saturday, we do anticipate some federal dollars coming in, and being that community boards budgets are so low in the first place, I can't understand why they even nibbling just off of the little bit we have. So I think we're in a stronger position. We're going to have to advocate collectively and obviously work with my colleagues at the council to make sure that you're not seeing any cuts, especially, and we look at, and I don't know if many people have seen, we got a 56% increase in applications. We got over 900 applications in from people who are interested in joining the community board. So y'all are going to be even busier because whatever vacancies we have, you know, we're gonna fill them. So being that there's so much interest in Queens folks wanting to join the community boards, I mean, once again, we need to make sure we're advocating and getting more and not less. So I feel good, you know, in terms of being able to go in to highlight our the specific disparities with the mayor, and we'll see where it goes. But by no means is it just me. Like, we all have to continue to raise our voices and work collectively on this. And we have to have a citywide strategy too. I mean, I'm going to be speaking to the other borough presidents as well, because this impacts each and every one of us, and it doesn't make any sense when people should be more engaged in their communities, not less. So I feel relatively good with federal dollars coming in. I expect Congress to pass their portion Friday, the House of Representatives, and then it goes to the Senate. So God willing, we'll see some movement on that sooner than later, and we may be able to avoid some of these cuts, period. But let's keep watching that closely as well.
Okay, thanks. And just my second question is to Richard Lee. Is there any way that I could get the numbers in terms of the Department of Education and seats? So we're in the process of 10,000 units of affordable housing on the peninsula. So it should be sinking soon. But in all of the EIS documentation, the Department of Education indicates that there are sufficient seats. So if you could provide what the actuals are so that we can present with 10,000 units coming in, how are we going to have seats? So I'd appreciate that.
Sure, we can pull that. And if you give me the schools that you want specifically, we could pull the rates of those specific schools too. So you could go that low in terms of like the numerical analysis. Okay. We will be using the School Construction Authority's Blue Book on capacity. And in those book, it tells you enrollment and what the capacity of that school building is. And so by looking at those two things, we can give you what the overcrowding rate is. It's just that with the COVID happening, those overcrowding rates, I mean, the capacity rates have been kind of shifting, but we do know how many school students were enrolled and what the capacity is. So we can provide that. Just let us know what school specifically you would like.
Okay, we'll send the list. Thank you, Richard.
And let me add, the chancellor last year sometime had came in and spoke of the Rockaways getting a sufficient amount of uptick in funding on seats. So we need to check into that to see where they're at on that. And Dolores is absolutely right. We need to see some new schools, and it's a continuous battle with the administration on getting new schools out there. And it makes absolutely no sense. So so I agree with that. And also, just lastly, before I left the council, I know many of my colleagues may remember this, we passed legislation, I believe, through the zoning committee, which I think Councilman Moya sponsored, on us getting more direct data on school seats when these developments are happening, because DOE likes to play games with the school seats. So I look forward to that as well. So thank you for that, Dolores.
Thank you.
All righty, any other questions? Any other, okay, I'm gonna go to Mike Budabin.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Borough President. I appreciate that. Just going to take a second here. First of all, just say thank you to Richard and Amanda. I found this information extremely valuable, just to sort of see it laid out. Very helpful to me. And on that note, I just want to piggyback a little bit on what Chair Weitzman was saying, and just sort of make a suggestion or a comment here about something I think would at least be really useful to me. When I see all this laid out, obviously, all of us here being Queens folks, we might be argued that we're being a little subjective, but it sure looks like we're not getting our fair share of the pie here in the big picture. I grew up in the Bronx and I moved to Queens. So those are the two boroughs I've lived in most of my time in New York. And I'll be honest with you, it felt kind of the same way in the Bronx when I was there. And I don't know if that's a coincidence or maybe those really are two boroughs that are sort of getting cut out of their fair share of the dollar here. But look, I understand budgets and I understand the need to make cuts when you have less money. What I don't understand is why some people, as part of an entity in New York City here, are going to have to bear a larger brunt of that. And I found even this sort of, I'm sure you guys put this together, relatively quickly. It showed you put a lot of work into it, but it seems like it will be really valuable to me. And I think this probably is the entity that has the agency to do that, to speak on behalf of the borough. When this is all said and done in advance of next year, to have some kind of comprehensive response before we got to get these, numbers from budget and respond to it, to prep it by saying, hey, look, here's what you did last year. Comprehensively, here's how we, frankly, didn't get what our fair share. Here's where we propose you can fix it. Here are some of the ways in which it affected our people on the ground. It causes, people to die. It causes services not to be rendered, and it's not fair. I just think now is the time to think about that process when we have, the runway in advance of next year, so that we're not always reacting. And you guys would know better than me what the best way to do that is. But it seems appropriate to me because at least when I look at this from my perch, it doesn't seem fair. And there's got to be a way we can get this message across to Borough Hall. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Can I jump in here? Mike, thank you. I 100% agree. Actually, before this meeting, the VP and I were discussing how information right now, because everybody, we're still in a pandemic and everyone is so concerned with that, as they should be, how hard it is to find information right now. But the BP and I were talking earlier how like this time next year, there's going to be ideally so much more information readily available, and that he and we just want to analyze this data. Like I said, the data was difficult to find this year. Only because, even reaching out to hospitals to get information, obviously they're very busy doing other things rather than, giving us the most updated statistic. So I think that this time next year, that's definitely something that we would be able to look into.
We've been drummed.
And one other thing, if individuals on the data side, because it is really hard to find this data, even with city agencies, there is the public information law and the city provides data, but it's never updated. So if council members would like to advocate for something, I think it's accurate data be presented timely into the data portal with the mayor's office. And that is actually public information. It's just usually 2 years kind of behind.
So I have no question for Richard on education.
Let me go to Betty first, and then I'm gonna come back to you, Vincent.
Thank you.
CB10, Betty.
Thank you, Mr. Borough President. Thank you, Richard and Amanda, for the excellent job. Richard, you get points. You can play with a toddler and not even miss a syllable.
I got 2 here now, right now. The second one came down. The third one's still upstairs, so we'll see if I get 3 in a little bit.
I want to second what Mike Budabin said, really. One of the things, as the borough president said earlier, we have learned this year very clearly what many of the inequities have been in terms of the pandemic. We also know what many of the inequities have been over the years budget-wise for this budget, the age-old Manhattan and the colonies. We have seen, we have lived, we've experienced those inequities. I think we need to tie both together as we move forward, because one contributes to the other, and those inequities are all throughout every agency as we deal here in the borough of Queens. Just because we all work together to maintain this borough as best we can, those inequities exist, and we need to really get a whole lot louder about fighting them. Thank you.
Thank you. Vincent, back to you.
Richard, so about building and overloading, are they telling you that they're renting space in old parochial schools? Because if you look at PSIS 91 is overcrowded, but they signed a lease and rented out St. Pancras School to downsize and move some of the children in there. And additionally, in the charter program, where they said they didn't have enough building space in the system, they leased Redeemer Lutheran School for a K to 12 charter school, K to 11, no, K to 12. So are you getting that much accurate information?
So the data that the SCA has is actually, it provides the school for every single public school, how many seats there are and how many students there are. So that's the information that we have. I can look a little bit more closely on locations because it doesn't give that information, it just lists the school.
That's my point. If they're telling you there's 1,000 seats in PS 91 and it's overcrowded, and at the same time they're leasing 350 somewhere else, that's not accurate.
Yeah, so we'll look into that one more time. The one thing is that I wanted to also mention, because Borough President mentioned it, is that Queens right now, since the last 5-year capital plan that came out in November, we are anticipated to get actually 24,000 new seats, and this is all across. They break it down by school districts, yeah, and this is across different school districts. And so we are anticipating 24,000 seats, but even with these seats, especially our high schools, will still be overcrowded. So we could also include this data if people want it for their records.
All right, thank you, Richard. All righty. Do I have any other? Councilmember Grodenchik. Welcome, Barry. I didn't see you.
I've been here. I've just been hiding. I came in with Adrian and Paul. I just want to comment. School Construction Authority, at least in my neck of the woods. I'm sorry to see Lorraine Grillo going because she's just an absolutely fantastic public servant. They have been very amenable. We took 2 Catholic schools that closed in Our Lady of Lourdes on Springfield and St. Robert Bellarmine, and added they just opened them this fall. They worked on them very quickly. In fact, they were some of the very few projects that they kept going during COVID, and that alone was just over 700 seats. So we've been having some success with them, and we've provided them with sites. And I know others have done as well. My colleagues have done as well. They're always looking for sites, as you know, and I just wanted to put that forward. But in my district alone, we're doing about 2,600 new seats, and almost 900 of them have opened already.
Thanks, Barry.
Thank you, Borough President.
Vincent, you got another question? Oh, your hand is still raised. All righty. Okay. All righty. Seeing no other questions, I'd like to call a vote on the Queens Borough Board's response to the fiscal year 2022 budget. We will start with community board chairs and then council members. We will begin with Community Board 1.
Yes.
All right, Community Board 2.
Yes.
Community Board 3.
Yes.
Community Board 4.
Yes.
Community Board 5. 5. Vincent. Just got to unmute yourself.
Yes. Thank you.
Community Board 6.
Yes.
Community Board 7.
Yes.
Community Board 8. CB8.
Martha, can you unmute?
Where's Martha go?
Or raise your hand for yes?
Oh, there you, CB8, CB8.
I don't see everyone.
On the phone.
Martha. Oh, I don't see her. Either. Oh, is she on by phone?
No,
right,
she's
well-
in, but we'll move forward and we'll
Okay,
see if we can
CB.
get.
Okay, we'll move to CB9,
Yes.
CB10,
Yes.
CB11,
Yes.
CB12,
Yes.
CB13,
Yes.
CB14.
I need to recuse myself on anything associated with the Department of Education, and on the balance of the budget, I vote yes.
Thank you, Dolores. Alrighty, who did we miss? Martha, is she on yet? All right, we'll move on to council members now.
Can I say something, Borough
Yes,
President?
yes, please, chair of the delegation.
The delegation cannot vote on the budget because of course, as you know, we will be doing our budget and this will be included in our budget. So we can't vote on this.
Okay. All righty. Thank you, Madam Chair. All righty. With that being said, I want to thank community board chairs and members of the New York City Council's Queens delegation for joining us this evening. My office will submit our list of budget priorities with the changes and additions we discussed, and it's been submitted to the mayor and of course to the council and director of management and budget. And I want to thank each and every one of you for all of the work that you continuously do. Also want to say that on Wednesday, York College is opening up as a mass vaccination site. So if you're out there listening, if you're a community board who did not know that, obviously this particular site is dedicated to specific zip codes in Southeast Queens. A lot of zip codes in Southeast Queens. I urge everybody to promote this vaccination site. I know Barry and others have been working on Martin Van Buren. I think, right, am I right? Is it Martin Van Buren we're opening up?
Yes, it's open. It opened today. Unfortunately, It's a low dose, but we're moving in the right direction, Borough President.
Right, and we're going to see a lot more pop-ups and other things that happen. And most of you have heard the news that Biden has ordered about 600 million dosages. So by July, everybody should technically have access to the vaccine if all goes well. We just want to make sure that we're keeping that front and center as we try to get to a recovery across.
Mr. Borough President, if I may?
Yes.
Just, first of all, wonderful meeting. Thank you to your staff, a great presentation. Just wanted to make sure that everyone was clear on the stipulation as far as the vaccines are concerned at York College. The specific Southeast Queens zip codes will be open just for the first week. After the first week, York College will be open to the entire borough of Queens, only Queens, after the first week. So please, tell everyone you know that needs to be vaccinated. Southeast Queens zip codes just the first week, beginning on Wednesday the 24th. Subsequent to that, it will be open to the entire borough of Queens. 3,000 residents per day is what we want. So I just wanted to make that stipulation. I got my vaccine this weekend. Go get yours.
Oh, go ahead. All righty. I just want to thank, once again, this is our first time, well, not Richard's first time. He's like a pro. He's been doing this forever. I can say the same thing about Amanda too. I mean, she's been doing this work, but now, she's working at the BP's office, but did it at Karen's office for many years. And I just want to thank them for the work that they put in. Carolina, to my staff, Maricela. I don't know if I'm missing anybody else on this line today, to the Deputy VP and obviously the Chief of Staff, Frank Joseph. I just want to thank them for all of the work they did to get this together. And it's really been a seamless transition because we have a great staff here. And I just want to thank them for everything that they continue to do. So we look forward to advocating, and definitely, I'm not shy about raising my voice to the mayor. So we will certainly be doing that in a big way. So I want to thank you all for being here. And I would now like to officially call this meeting to a close.
Great job, Mr. BP.
Have a great night. Great to see all my colleagues. I miss all of y'all at the council.
Have a great night, everyone.
Have a great
We
night.